Derek Matthews, a 34-year-old construction supervisor and devoted father of 3, thought his biggest challenge was returning to work after a back injury that had sidelined him for 4 months. Then Constance Whitmore knocked on his door at 7:15 a.m. on a crisp October morning, demanding he immediately remove the garish eyesore he'd installed in his backyard. What unfolded over the next 8 weeks would test everything Derek believed about protecting his children's happiness and building a community where families could truly thrive. Before this story begins, consider, when did creating joy for children become a violation worth fighting over? This happened just 6 months ago in a middle-class suburb outside Phoenix, Arizona. The Matthews family still lives there today, and their backyard has become something of a neighborhood landmark. Derek had spent 3 months of his medical leave transforming the barren patch of dirt behind their modest ranch home into what his 8-year-old daughter Emma called the most magical place on earth. Using his construction skills and every penny of their savings account, he'd built a custom playground that seemed to glow with happiness. The swing set featured bright red seats suspended from sunshine yellow frames. The climbing structure burst with forest green platforms connected by royal blue monkey bars. A small slide curved down in vibrant orange, while a sandbox border was painted in cheerful purple. Wind chimes in rainbow colors caught the desert breeze, creating gentle music that drifted across the yard. The playground wasn't just beautiful, it was therapeutic. Derek's back injury had occurred when a scaffold collapsed at a job site, leaving him with 2 herniated discs and months of physical therapy ahead. During his darkest days, when pain medication left him groggy and useless, watching his children play on equipment he'd built with his own hands became his anchor to hope. 6-year-old Tyler would announce his successful monkey bar crossings like an Olympic commentator. 4-year-old Connor treated the sandbox like his personal construction site. Mimicking his father's work with tiny trucks and serious concentration, Emma had designated herself the playground's official safety inspector, ensuring her younger brothers followed all the rules their dad had carefully explained. Michelle, Derek's wife of 10 years, worked double shifts as a registered nurse to compensate for his lost income. She'd arrive home exhausted at midnight to find Derek sitting on their back porch, watching the kids' bedroom windows and listening to the gentle chiming of those rainbow wind chimes. "It's like you built them a piece of childhood that can never be taken away," she'd whispered one evening, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove. The morning Constance Whitmore appeared at their front door. Derek was helping Connor navigate the monkey bars, while Emma timed him with a pink stopwatch. Tyler was constructing an elaborate sandcastle, complete with a moat he'd filled with the garden hose. The sound of the doorbell cut through their laughter like a blade. Constance stood on their welcome mat looking like she'd stepped from a black and white photograph. Steel gray hair, pulled into a severe bun, charcoal suit pressed to military precision, clipboard held against her chest like armor. She'd lived in Sunset Ridge Estates for 15 years, and had chaired the Architectural Review Committee for 12, earning a reputation as the neighborhood's unofficial aesthetic enforcer. At 58, she'd never married and had no children, viewing the community as her personal design project, rather than a place where families actually lived. "Mr. Matthews," she began without preamble, "I've received multiple complaints about the unauthorized recreational structure you've installed in your rear yard. The colors violate Section 4.7 of our CC&Rs, which clearly states that all exterior improvements must maintain earth tone compatibility with the desert environment." Derek blinked, still holding Connor's waist as his youngest son dangled from the blue monkey bars. "I'm sorry, what complaints? About the kids' playground?" Constance's lips compressed into a thin line. "The structure creates visual discord that negatively impacts property values throughout the entire block. According to our architectural guidelines, approved recreational equipment must be limited to beige, tan, brown, or sage green color palettes." She produced a thick packet of papers from her clipboard. "You have 14 days to bring the installation into compliance or face daily fines beginning at $50 and escalating to $200 per day." The packet felt heavy in Derek's hands, 17 pages of regulations he'd never seen before, filled with subsections and amendments that read like legal code. "Ma'am, I had no idea about these color restrictions. Nobody mentioned them when we bought the house 3 years ago." "Ignorance of community standards is not an acceptable defense," Constance replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to compliance. "The CC&Rs were provided to you at closing. I assume you simply chose not to review them thoroughly." Derek's memory flickered back to their home purchase, the mountain of paperwork, signed in a rushed closing while Michelle was 8 months pregnant with Connor. They'd been focused on mortgage terms and inspection reports, not HOA color charts. Look, I understand rules are important, but we're talking about playground equipment for small children. Surely there's some flexibility for family recreational needs. Constance's expression didn't soften. Mr. Matthews, if we make exceptions for one family's preferences, the entire architectural integrity of our community begins to deteriorate. Property values depend on consistent aesthetic standards. She gestured toward Derek's colorful creation. What you've built may bring joy to your children, but it brings distress to neighbors who've invested their life savings in maintaining a cohesive, upscale environment. As Derek watched Constance walk back to her pristine white sedan, Connor tugged on his shirt. "Daddy, why was that lady angry about our playground?" Derek knelt down to meet his son's concerned eyes. "She thinks the colors are too bright for the neighborhood, buddy." "But bright colors make us happy," Connor said with 4-year-old logic that cut straight to the truth. "I know they do, son. I know they do." That evening, Derek spread the HOA documents across their kitchen table, while Michelle bathed the kids upstairs. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions manual was 43 pages of dense legal language that seemed designed to regulate every conceivable aspect of homeownership. Section 4.7, buried on page 28, did indeed restrict exterior colors to earth tones compatible with the natural desert environment. A chart on page 30 showed approved color swatches, various shades of beige, brown, tan, and muted green that looked like they'd been drained of all life. "How did we miss this?" Derek muttered, running his hands through his hair. Michelle appeared in her scrubs, having just returned from her shift. "Miss, what?" Derek explained Constance's visit and the color restrictions. Michelle sank into the chair beside him, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Derek, we can't afford fines on top of everything else. The medical bills from your injury, the reduced income. We're barely keeping our heads above water as it is." Derek knew she was right. His workers' compensation had covered the medical expenses, but at 60% of his normal salary, they'd already depleted their emergency fund building the playground. Daily fines could quickly spiral into thousands of dollars they simply didn't have. "Maybe we could repaint it," Derek suggested without conviction. "Keep the structure but change the colors to their approved palette." "Have you seen their approved colors?" Michelle asked, flipping through the manual. "It's like they want to suck the joy out of everything. Imagine Emma's face when we tell her the bright red swings have to become desert sand beige." They sat in silence, contemplating the impossible choice between their children's happiness and their financial survival. Outside, the wind chimes played their gentle rainbow song, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. The next morning, Derek drove to the local home improvement store, hoping to find paint that might satisfy both his children's need for color and the HOA's earth tone requirements. He spent 2 hours studying paint chips, trying to find the brightest possible shades within the approved palette. The closest he could come was a sage green that looked like olive oil and a brown that reminded him of mud. "You look like a man facing an impossible decision," said a voice behind him. Derek turned to find Walter Chen, an elderly neighbor from 3 houses down. At 72, Walter was a retired engineer who'd moved to Sunset Ridge 5 years earlier with his wife Dorothy. They'd always waved to Derek and the kids but had never really talked. "HOA color compliance," Derek explained, holding up 2 equally depressing paint samples. "Apparently my kid's playground is too colorful for the neighborhood." Walter's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. "Ah, you've met Constance. She tried to make Dorothy remove her rose garden because the flowers were too vibrant for desert landscaping. Said pink roses violated the natural color scheme. What did you do?" "We researched," Walter said simply. "Found out that Section 4.7 was added to the CC&RS in an amendment 3 years ago. Constance convinced the board that strict color control would increase property values, but she never provided any actual evidence. Most homeowners didn't even know about the vote because it was held during a special meeting in January when half the neighborhood was traveling." Derek felt a spark of hope. "So the rules might not be legitimate?" "The rules are legitimate," Walter clarified, "but the process by which they were implemented might not have followed proper procedures. More importantly, there's Section 2.3, which allows for variances when enforcing regulations, would create undue hardship or fail to serve the community's best interests." That afternoon, Derek found himself in the Sunset Ridge Community Center, requesting Copies of all HOA board meeting minutes from the past 5 years. The volunteer office manager, a friendly woman named Carol, seemed sympathetic to his situation. Constance has been pushing stricter and stricter rules for years, Carol confided as she prepared the requested documents. Started with house paint colors, then moved to landscaping, now recreational equipment. Some folks think she's gone too far. But most people are too busy or too scared of conflict to speak up. Derek spent the evening reading through 5 years of meeting minutes, discovering a pattern that both frustrated and encouraged him. Constance had systematically introduced increasingly restrictive policies, always during poorly attended meetings and always with the justification of maintaining property values. But there was also evidence of growing resistance. Several homeowners had submitted complaints about overly rigid enforcement, and 2 board members had raised concerns about the community becoming unnecessarily restrictive for families. The breakthrough came on page 47 of the year-old minutes. Board member Jennifer Thompson had proposed a family recreation exemption that would allow playground equipment in primary colors, arguing that communities should prioritize children's developmental needs alongside aesthetic considerations. The proposal had been tabled pending further research, but it had never been brought back for a vote. Derek found Jennifer Thompson's contact information in the community directory and called her that evening. She answered on the second ring, and her voice brightened when Derek explained his situation. "I've been wondering when someone would challenge Constance's color crusade," Jennifer said. "I'm a mother of 2 teenagers, and I've watched this neighborhood become increasingly hostile to young families. Your playground sounds like exactly what our community needs more of, not less." Jennifer explained that she'd been serving on the board for 3 years, trying to balance Constance's aesthetic demands with practical family needs. Constance genuinely believes she's protecting property values, but she's lost sight of what makes a community actually valuable: the people living in it and the joy they create together. "Is there anything I can do legally?" Derek asked. "There might be. That family recreation exemption I proposed last year, I never gave up on it. If we can show that your situation represents exactly the kind of undue hardship that exemption was designed to address, we might be able to get it back on the agenda." Derek felt hope growing in his chest. What would that take? Community support. If enough neighbors speak up about the value of family-friendly policies, the board would have to listen. Constance has intimidated people into silence for years, but she's just one voice on a 7-member board. The next week became a masterclass in neighborhood diplomacy. Derek knocked on doors throughout Sunset Ridge, sharing his story and asking neighbors about their own experiences with HOA enforcement. What he discovered surprised him. Maria Gonzalez, a single mother 2 streets over, had been forced to remove a cheerful yellow mailbox post because it violated color restrictions. "My 6-year-old daughter picked that color because it made her happy when she got off the school bus," Maria explained. "Now it's this depressing beige that she says looks like mud." James and Lisa Parker, a young couple with twin toddlers, had received violation notices for allowing their children's sidewalk chalk art to remain on their driveway for more than 24 hours. "We're talking about washable chalk," Lisa said incredulously. "But apparently temporary children's art creates visual clutter that impacts the neighborhood's professional appearance." Most surprising was elderly resident Frank Morrison, who'd received a warning for the small memorial garden he'd created for his late wife. Constance said the decorative elements were too personal and emotional for a front yard display, Frank explained, his voice heavy with grief and anger. "Those are my wife's favorite flowers. She planted that spot with her own hands 30 years ago." Each conversation revealed the same pattern: Constance interpreting HOA rules in the most restrictive possible way, prioritizing abstract aesthetic ideals over the real human needs of community members. But Derek also discovered something else: a growing network of neighbors who were tired of living in fear of violation notices and ready to support change. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Park, a child psychologist who lived 4 houses down from Derek, approached him at the community mailbox cluster one afternoon. "I've been watching your children play on that beautiful playground," she said. "As a professional who works with child development, I have to tell you that what you've created is absolutely perfect for their ages and developmental needs." Derek explained his situation, and Dr. Park's expression shifted from admiration to indignation. "This is exactly the kind of short-sighted policy that damages communities long-term," she said. Research consistently shows that children need bright, stimulating environments for healthy development. More importantly, communities that prioritize children's needs attract young families, which actually increases property values over time. Dr. Park offered to provide professional testimony about the developmental benefits of Derek's playground, but she also shared something more personal. My husband and I have been considering moving because this neighborhood feels increasingly unwelcoming to families. Your fight isn't just about playground colors, it's about what kind of community we want to live in. By the end of the second week, Derek had collected signatures from 47 households supporting his request for a family recreation exemption. Even more significantly, he discovered that 12 families were considering moving specifically because of the HOA's increasingly restrictive policies. The pattern was clear. Constance's crusade to protect property values was actually driving away the young families that made neighborhoods most desirable to buyers. Empty nesters and retirees might appreciate pristine uniformity, but most home buyers wanted to see evidence of vibrant community life. Derek submitted his formal variance request to the HOA board, accompanied by Dr. Park's professional assessment, a petition signed by nearly half the neighborhood, and documentation showing that similar communities with family-friendly policies had higher property values than those with restrictive aesthetic codes. Constance's response arrived 3 days later, a certified letter denying the variance request and imposing the first $50 fine for non-compliance. The letter was coldly professional, but Derek could sense the anger beneath its formal language. The Architectural Review Committee finds no compelling reason to deviate from established community standards, the letter stated. Individual preferences, regardless of the number of supporters, cannot supersede the collective commitment to maintaining our neighborhood's distinguished character. But Derek also received something else in the mail that day, a letter from board member Jennifer Thompson, informing him that his situation had been added to the agenda for the next monthly board meeting. The full board, not just Constance's committee, will hear your case, she wrote. Make sure your supporters attend. This could be the moment we've been waiting for to restore balance to our community policies. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. Derek spent the intervening days preparing his presentation, gathering more supporting documentation, and encouraging his neighborhood allies to attend. Dr. Park agreed to speak about child development needs. Walter offered to address the legal aspects of variance procedures, and Jennifer Thompson promised to formally reintroduce her family recreation exemption proposal. The night before the meeting, Derek sat in his backyard watching his children play on the disputed playground. Emma was teaching Connor how to pump his legs on the swing, while Tyler attempted to cross the monkey bars without assistance. The setting sun painted everything in golden light, and the rainbow wind chimes caught the evening breeze. "Daddy," Emma called out, "are they really going to take away our playground?" Derek had tried to shield his children from the conflict, but 8-year-old Emma was too perceptive to be completely fooled. "I'm going to fight very hard to keep it exactly the way it is," he promised. "Good," she said with the fierce certainty only children possess. "Because this is the most beautiful playground in the whole world, and beautiful. Things shouldn't have to become ugly just because one person doesn't like them." The community center was packed beyond capacity on Thursday evening. Derek arrived 30 minutes early to find that nearly every seat was taken, with additional neighbors lining the walls. He'd expected support from the families he'd personally contacted, but the turnout included residents he'd never met. Elderly couples, young professionals, teenagers, and what appeared to be several entire extended families. Carol from the HOA office later told Derek she'd never seen attendance like that in 12 years of managing community meetings. "People were calling all day asking about the agenda and what time to arrive," she explained. Word had spread through the whole neighborhood that something important was finally happening. Constance entered the meeting room exactly at 7 o'clock, flanked by 2 other committee members who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the crowd. She took her seat at the head table with practiced authority, but Derek noticed her hands trembling slightly as she organized her papers. Board President Michael Rodriguez called the meeting to order and explained the variance request process. Derek was invited to present his case first, given 5 minutes to explain his position. Standing before the packed room, Derek felt his construction worker's instincts take over. He'd supervised crews and dealt with difficult clients for 15 years. He knew how to communicate clearly under pressure. "My name is Derek Matthews, and I'm a father, a homeowner, and a community member who loves this neighborhood," he began. 4 months ago, I built a playground in my backyard using every skill I possess and every dollar I could spare. I built it during my recovery from a workplace injury, and it became my therapy as much as my children's joy. Derek explained the situation simply and directly, emphasizing his willingness to work within reasonable guidelines, while protecting his children's right to play in an environment that supported their development. He acknowledged the importance of community standards while questioning whether those standards should prioritize abstract aesthetic ideals over the real needs of families. "I'm not asking for the right to ignore all rules," Derek concluded. "I'm asking for the wisdom to recognize when those rules might be causing more harm than good, and the courage to put children's well-being ahead of rigid uniformity." Dr. Sarah Parks spoke next, explaining the developmental benefits of stimulating play environments and the psychological importance of bright colors for children's emotional health. Her professional credentials carried obvious weight with the board, and her passion was unmistakable. "Communities that welcome children and support their developmental needs attract young families," she explained. "Those families bring energy, involvement, and long-term stability that enhances property values far more effectively than restrictive color codes." Walter Chen addressed the legal aspects, explaining that the current color restrictions had been implemented through questionable procedures, and that the variance process existed specifically to address situations like Derek's. "Good governance requires flexibility and wisdom, not just rigid rule enforcement," he stated. When Constance was invited to present the committee's position, she stood with visible tension in her posture. Her presentation was meticulously prepared, complete with property value charts and photographs of other HOA communities that had maintained strict aesthetic standards. "The Architectural Review Committee's responsibility is to protect the investment every homeowner has made in this community," she began. "Individual desires, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot be allowed to undermine the collective standards that maintain our neighborhood's value and character." Constance argued that allowing Derek's playground to remain would set a precedent that could lead to aesthetic chaos throughout the community. She presented letters from 3 neighbors complaining about the garish colors and carnival atmosphere that the playground supposedly created. But as Constance spoke, something unexpected happened. Several audience members began shaking their heads visibly, and Derek noticed whispered conversations rippling through the crowd. When she finished her presentation, Board President Rodriguez opened the floor for community comments. The response was overwhelming. Speaker after speaker stood to support Derek's position, sharing their own frustrations with overly restrictive enforcement and their appreciation for families that brought life to the neighborhood. Maria Gonzalez described her daughter's disappointment over the forced mailbox color change. Frank Morrison spoke about the Memorial Garden warning with tears in his eyes. Lisa Parker talked about feeling unwelcome as a young mother in a community that seemed to view children as nuisances rather than assets. But the most powerful moment came when 12-year-old Madison Taylor asked to speak. "I know I'm just a kid," she said, "but this is my neighborhood too. Mr. Matthews's playground isn't hurting anybody, it's making little kids happy. Why is that bad?" Madison's question hung in the air like a challenge that demanded an honest answer. Derek watched Constance's face as the girl spoke and saw something shift in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty or perhaps recognition of how her position must sound to someone Madison's age. The discussion continued for another hour, but the tide had clearly turned. Board member after board member expressed support for Derek's variance request and concern about the direction of HOA enforcement. Jennifer Thompson formally reintroduced her family recreation exemption proposal, now backed by overwhelming community support. When the board voted, the result was 5-2 in favor of granting Derek's variance and implementing the family recreation exemption for future cases. Constance and one committee member cast the only opposing votes. As neighbors congratulated Derek and began filing out of the meeting room, he noticed Constance, sitting alone at the head table, looking smaller and more fragile than he'd ever seen her. Acting on an impulse he didn't fully understand, Derek approached her. "Ms. Whitmore," he said gently, "I know we disagree about this issue, but I want you to know I respect your commitment to the community. You've put a lot of effort into maintaining standards here." Constance looked up with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "I never meant to hurt children," she said quietly. "I just wanted to protect what we've built here." "I understand that," Derek replied. "Maybe we can find ways to do both, protect what's valuable while making room for families to flourish." 3 weeks later, Derek was putting finishing touches on a small flower garden beside the playground when Constance appeared at his back fence. She stood there for several minutes watching Emma, Tyler and Connor play on the colorful equipment, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Matthews," she called out. Derek approached the fence, unsure what to expect. "Miss Whitmore, how can I help you?" "I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice barely audible above the children's laughter. "I've been watching your children play and I remember being that happy once. Before I became so focused on controlling everything." Derek didn't know what to say, so he simply listened. "I lost sight of why we have communities in the first place," Constance continued. "It's not about perfect uniformity, it's about creating places where people can build good lives together." She paused, watching Tyler successfully navigate the monkey bars, while Emma cheered his accomplishment. "Your children are lucky to have a father who fights for their happiness." "Thank you," Derek said. "That means a lot coming from you." As Constance walked back toward her house, Derek noticed her posture was somehow less rigid, her pace less militaristic. 2 days later, he learned from Carol that Constance had submitted her resignation as Architectural Review Committee chair, citing a desire to step back and reassess community priorities. The family recreation exemption was officially adopted into the CC&RS 3 months later, along with new guidelines requiring that all aesthetic restrictions be balanced against family needs and community well-being. The board also implemented a new policy requiring broader community input before any major rule changes could be adopted. Dr. Park was elected to replace Constance on the Architectural Review Committee, bringing child development expertise to decisions about playground equipment, family recreation areas, and other amenities that supported neighborhood families. Walter Chen was appointed to chair a new community relations committee tasked with ensuring that HOA enforcement served residents rather than intimidating them. Derek's playground became something of a neighborhood gathering spot. Parents would bring their children over after school and on weekends, creating impromptu community socializing that strengthened relationships throughout Sunset Ridge. The bright colors that had once sparked controversy now served as a symbol of the community's commitment to welcoming families and prioritizing children's needs. 6 months after the board meeting, Derek received a letter from a real estate agent thanking him for his community improvement efforts. Apparently, several prospective buyers had specifically mentioned the visible signs of family life, including his playground, as factors that made Sunset Ridge attractive compared to other HOA communities they'd considered. Michelle was promoted to charge nurse at the hospital, partly due to her demonstrated leadership during the family's HOA crisis. "You showed me how to stand up for what matters," she told Derek. "If you could take on the entire Architectural Review Committee for our kids, I could certainly advocate for better policies at work." The most meaningful change, however, was in Derek himself. The man who had once felt broken by a workplace injury had discovered reserves of strength and leadership he'd never known he possessed. The construction worker who preferred practical problems to political conflicts had learned that sometimes protecting your family requires engaging with systems that seem intimidating or unfair. Emma, now 9 years old, still considered their backyard the most magical place on earth. But she'd also learned something valuable about standing up for what you believe in. "Daddy taught me that beautiful things are worth fighting for," she told Dr. Park during a neighborhood barbecue. "And that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that kids can help them fix." Tyler and Connor, now 7 and 5 respectively, had no memory of the controversy that nearly cost them their playground. For them, the bright red swings and rainbow wind chimes were simply part of the landscape of childhood, as natural and permanent as the desert mountains that surrounded their community. On quiet evenings, Derek still sat on his back porch listening to those wind chimes and watching his children play. But now he also saw neighbor children climbing the same monkey bars, digging in the same sandbox, and creating the same joyful noise that had started it all. The playground had become more than family recreation equipment. It had become a community asset that brought people together and reminded everyone what really mattered. The story of Derek Matthews and his colorful playground spread beyond Sunset Ridge, inspiring. Similar stands for family-friendly policies in HOA communities across the region. But for Derek, the most important outcome was simpler and more personal. His children would grow up knowing that their father had fought for their right to experience childhood in full, vivid color. Sometimes protecting what matters most requires courage you didn't know you had, allies you never expected to find, and the willingness to believe that communities can change when good people stand together. Derek's playground remained a beacon of bright color in the desert landscape. not just because he'd built it with his own hands, but because his neighbors had chosen to defend it as a symbol of the community they wanted to be. After hearing this story, you'll never look at an HOA notice the same way again. But more importantly, you might find yourself asking, what would you be willing to fight for to protect your family's joy? Sometimes the most important battles aren't against external enemies, but against the creeping forces of conformity that try to convince us that safety lies in making everything gray and uniform. Derek Matthews discovered that real community strength comes not from perfect aesthetic coordination, but from neighbors willing to stand together for the simple, radical idea that children deserve to play in a world painted with all the colors of happiness. In a landscape that wanted everything beige, he dared to demand rainbow, and found that most people, deep down, were just waiting for someone brave enough to ask for what they really wanted too. If this situation unfolded in your neighborhood, would you find the courage to stand up like Derek did? Sometimes protecting what matters most requires us to discover strength we never knew we had. The most beautiful victories aren't won by overpowering opponents, but by helping entire communities remember what they're really fighting for, not perfect compliance with arbitrary rules, but the right to build lives filled